Hello and welcome to SurrealDB stream number 18. We're going to be talking about SurrealDB 1.2.0. We released just a few minutes ago. And in there, talking about some of the performance improvements and bug fixes and some of the awesome new features that we've just had added into this release. So if you're listening in, please add to the chat where you're calling in from or where you're listening in from. And if you've got any questions about security, I'm joined here with Gerard. He is our senior security engineer, focused on authentication and security in our cloud. So if you've got any questions around security, then Gerard is the person to ask those questions too. But great to have everyone with us today. And we're going to jump right into the 1.2.0 release, which we're really excited about today. Awesome. So 1.2.0 got some a lot of bug fixes. Bug fixes that a lot of it have been found by the community. So thank you to everyone who's added GitHub issues and found bugs on our Discord. We'll be going through some of these and how we've improved those in this stream. In addition, we've got some performance improvements. Improvements to how vectors and large vectors, especially vectors that come from OpenAI, for instance, with 1,536 elements, those are massively improved on this version. And also improvements to the WebSocket protocol and HTTP responses around compression. So improvements to performance, and that should kind of trickle down into the queries that you're running against the database. One of the before we jump into some of the little features here, Gerard, there's a feature you added actually in this version, which is, it doesn't seem like a big feature, but it's really exciting in terms of what it can enable and how it enables further integrations in the future.
Yeah, so I worked on this JSON Web Key set feature for token verification. And I don't know, by the way, if those of you joining us today, if you have used, defining a token within SurrealDB before to authenticate with either external provider or some provider of your own, some backend that you developed separate from SurrealDB. But this feature significantly improves how you can use the define token feature to integrate with third-party authentication providers like Auth0, like AWS Cognito, And yeah, so our motivation for developing this feature was that we are aware that some of you have some advanced security needs with regards to authentication that are not yet covered by SurrealDB. And we wanted you to allow integrating with third-party providers that could meet those needs because they are focused specifically on developing authentication features. And I will explain a bit the context. So those of you that are not familiar with it know if this feature might be interesting to you. And I will give you some information about how to use it and what you can do with it in case that you want to get started with it. So
yeah. Just before you jump in there, for those readers who don't know the difference, what is the difference between a JWT and a JWK or JWKs?
So JWT is basically what we talk about in SurrealDB when we talk about tokens. So a JWT is a statement of some claims that are signed by an issuer. So when you authenticate with somebody, for example, when you authenticate with SurrealDB using the sign-in within a scope, SurrealDB will give you a JWT, a token, that will contain the user who authenticated, to which scope this user is authenticated, and so on. So this is for SurrealDB. But there are authentication services that will allow you to authenticate, for example, with your Google identity. And then we'll issue a larger JWT, which will have claims about this identity. For example, your Gmail address, your name, surname, whether or not your email has been verified. And you can use this token to let's say, this token, if it's trusted by some services, you can use it to identify yourself and to get access to some resources if that service uses that token in this way. JWK, it's just a JSON Web Key. Is a way of defining a cryptographic key in JSON format. That's all it is. So in order to trust a JSON Web Token, you need to trust the key that was used to sign it. And a JW key is the representation of that key that you can trust. That's basically it.
So this is really exciting, isn't it? Because it enables now not just authentication within Surreal, which is what you could do beforehand, and that was flexible, but it had its limitations. This enables you to integrate now with external providers, whether that's from Amazon or from Google or from numerous providers out there. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. It's also true that you could technically do that before, but you could not properly do it. And the reason you could not is that, so you could before define a token. And define token, what it does is that it allows you to create, let's say, a way of trusting tokens issued by somebody else that are signed. So what you do is that you trust either the secret or the key pair that was used to sign that token. So that token will be able to be used to authenticate with SurrealDB. That you could do before. The problem is that these advanced authentication services like Auth0, AWS Cognito, they aim to be very secure. And so they don't sign all the tokens with the same key. They have a group of keys that they use to sign tokens. And the problem before was that in SurrealDB, you could only define a single key used to sign a single token. And that did not allow us to integrate properly with those more advanced authentication providers. And that is now possible.
So I'm going to jump into our documentation here, actually. So we've got two awesome tutorials, how-to guides on how to integrate with two kind of well-recognized authentication providers out there. The first one is Auth0. If you haven't used Auth0, incredibly flexible platform for all types of authentication. It enables you to work with your own authentication, your own password authentication, but also to have single sign-on, SAML, and everything else that you can imagine, which is amazing. So I'll get you to talk through that in a second, Gerard. The second one, obviously, if you haven't heard of it, AWS Cognito. It's an authentication service on Amazon Web Services. So this is a great addition. Again, this is not the limit of what you can do with SurrealDB 1.2.0. This is just an example. AWS Cognito is a great platform out there as well, but there are many others, and integrating with different authentication providers is now possible with this new functionality. So, Gerard, where should we start?
Yeah, well, just like Tobie said, no, these are two examples that I hope give you an idea of what is possible and how to get started integrating with other providers. But you can use the same process to integrate with your Google Identity, with Azure Active Directory, Keycloak, OneLogin. There are many providers that you would integrate with similarly. And yeah, so like Tobie said, these services are very, SSO single sign-on. Correct.
Awesome. Yeah.
No, yeah, go ahead.
So this would enable someone to authenticate in a traditional way with something like Okta or Auth0, and then to have that authentication kind of mirrored across into SurrealDB.
Yeah. So we get a lot of questions of users or developers that want in their app for it to be possible for users to authenticate with their Google account or their Discord account or their GitHub account. And it's definitely possible to build into your app integration with these individual identity providers. But the good thing about these big identity platforms is that they are integrated by default with all of these providers, and you can use them as a gateway to integrate with as many identity providers as you want. And that, of course, you would bring it into SurrealDB. So how that would work is that you wouldn't need any backend code. So, SurrealDB could be your only backend if you want it. And then you could have just a bare bones frontend, just JavaScript, that would send you to this authentication provider. Then with Auth0, AWS Cognito, you would do the authentication. You could authenticate with any identity that you choose, like Google, GitHub, Discord, whatever. And then you would go back to this client-side web application, which would talk with SurrealDB and use the token that this provider has issued you to create your own user in SurrealDB.
So it's incredibly flexible, this, isn't it? I just want to jump in and say, if you head to the docs and if you head to our how-to section on the left, you've got our two tutorials there. But it's really not that complicated to build in this advanced functionality and linking with these authentication platforms. It's relatively simple on the SurrealDB side, isn't it? There's a bit of configuration on the authentication platform side, but on the SurrealDB side, it's relatively simple.
Most of the work actually is in the authentication platform. That's one of the things that are improved by JWK. So before, when you defined a token, you needed to add the secret or the public key of the key pair that was used to sign the secret. And this required that you, as the person configuring SurrealDB, you needed to kind of understand how all of this fits together and how this works. But now with JSON Web Key sets, basically when you define a token, you just need to paste the URL of the JSON Web Key set that your authentication provider will provide during the onboarding process. So when you are configuring Auth0, you will be following their documentation, and at what point they will provide you this URL that Tobie is showing, or one in that format. And when you define the token, you just provide the URL that they have provided you, and that's all the configuration you need to do on the SurrealDB end. Of course, you will need to create some tables and some things for your application to work. But that's
absolutely. it. So we'll jump to that in a minute, because obviously this is step one, and that's really simple to set up. So now you can define a type JWKs on a token, and you can also do that on a scope if you've got scoped users. And if you've got type JWKs, you pass a value, and that value is that URL that you've been provided by the authentication provider. That's the first step. Obviously, you have to still, as Gerard said, you've got to still set up your permissions, and we'll jump to that in the tutorial. In fact, if you follow through the tutorial, you can see this. But effectively, here's an example of defining a user table, and here you've got access to the token, which was provided by that authorization platform, and you can check certain elements on that token to ensure that the right user has access to the right data.
Yeah.
So a load of flexibility here. Really, you can do completely custom authentication flows, functionality, permissions, and access logic. So yeah, really, really exciting. What have we missed, Gerard?
Yeah, for example, in what we are seeing here, there is one thing that I think is very interesting. The last statement in the permissions clause, it checks if the email is verified or not. And this is possible because we are using an external authentication provider. Because in SurrealDB, it is not possible to verify the identity of a person, of course. But in this case, we are using Auth0. And for example, Auth0 is able to send an email to that user with a link that they need to click for the email to be verified. So in this case, for example, you can, if you want, only allow access to users who have verified their email. So they know that they are the owner of that email address. And this, of course, is something that it was not possible today with SurrealDB, and it's now possible thanks to allowing this integration.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, that's incredible. So just jumping through here to explain to our people who are viewing the stream what this is doing. In the first example, we're basically saying, define this token, and we want to specify that example.com is our authorization provider. And authorization is then handled from our front-end application directly with that authorization provider. Then on the user table, we're basically saying, look, a user can only view, edit, update, or delete records if that token, which has been provided to us from the authorization provider, has got certain attributes. So we're checking that it's got valid data, valid user data. It's got the matching email. So the email column in this table has to match the email value in the token. And then the email verified, as Gerard just said, the email verified flag on that token. And that's something which is custom defined on each authentication provider, but that has to be true as well. And this, you can build some really powerful integrations and authorization flows. In fact, this enables SurrealDB kind of to be opened up to enterprise auth in a way. Is that correct?
Yeah, of course. So you can use these authentication providers not only to integrate with the well-known identity providers that we all know and love and we use day-to-day to log in some other apps, but of course you can integrate them also with enterprise authentication providers using SAML, OpenID Connect, and so on. Yeah.
It's exciting. It's exciting. So if you head to the documentation again, onto our how-to guides, and you scroll down to the bottom, obviously it walks you through how to do a lot of the custom logic in Auth0. So that's where you can really customize it as much as you want with JavaScript callback functions. But in addition, there's an example application that you can jump to in our examples repository, and that you can see the code, you can see the entire code on the SurrealDB side and on the authentication provider side as well. So If you want to see and kind of copy code to get up and running with this really quickly, then jump into the docs and head to the minimal example at the bottom, and that will take you through to our GitHub. Yeah, I mean, this is awesome. I can't wait to see what people build with this. If you've got integrations you want to add or you built that work alongside this as well, add them or add a pull request to have them added to the awesome Surreal repository as well.
That would be great.
But yeah, really excited to see what users create with this. What else have we missed on this side, Gerard?
I think one thing that maybe we should mention is that this is not only a usability benefit. No, of course there are things that were not possible before that are now possible, but also it improves security and reliability. In the case, for example, that you were already using a defined token to integrate with a third-party authentication provider that say it only uses a single key for now to sign the tokens that it issues, and you found no need for this feature. Also know that it can be a benefit if that provider provides JWKs as a way of verifying tokens, which probably it will. I would recommend that you use it. The reason is that it will enable two things. One is that those providers can get compromised, and when you integrate with a third-party provider, you are kind of trusting their security, which is usually very good. But if in the event they get compromised, they will want to rotate the signing keys that they use to sign the tokens. And that, in the case that you hard-coded the key when doing the defined key, which is what the only thing that was possible before, it would break authentication for your application. Because the people that authenticate in the future would be issued a token that would be signed with a different key that your application would not accept. But using JWKs, it would be accepted by default because you are pointing to an endpoint that is kept updated by the authentication provider. So this improves reliability of your application. And also security, because when the incident happens, they will rotate the keys and the keys will be updated also on SurrealDB. So all the tokens that were issued previous to the compromise, they will be revoked and SurrealDB will stop trusting them. So it's also a security improvement, which is very welcome.
This is awesome. And just, I know a lot of our users want to know about kind of our plans for security and some of the things we want to add in. What are some of the things on the short term that we're looking to add in on the authorization and the token side, just so users kind of had an idea of what our roadmap looks like for that?
Yeah, of course. So we cannot be super specific on that, but we have some general ideas of what domains we would like to touch on. And some is related to what I mentioned before. So this aims to cover some gaps that exist in SurrealDB with third-party providers that are dedicated specifically to this and do a very good job. But of course, we would like some of these features to be included natively in SurrealDB. On the shorter term, for example, we would like to add some claims on the tokens that are issued by SurrealDB. So SurrealDB, when you sign in, SurrealDB gives you also a JWT token that contains some claims. And we would like, for example, to add the JTI claim, which is just a unique identifier for the token that would allow you in your application to revoke individual sessions, quote unquote. So revoke some tokens of users that you don't want. Otherwise, when you issue a JWT, it's valid until its expiration. So in this way, you will be able to revoke the tokens. Also, for example, if you want to log in with GitHub using SurrealDB as your only backend, you would need to go through Auth0 or Cognito or an authentication provider that acts kind of as a proxy. The reason is that SurrealDB expects some claims in the JWT that GitHub does not provide. These platforms allow you to provide custom claims, which is what makes them interoperable with SurrealDB. So we would like to have more flexibility on how we accept JWT tokens and what you are able to do as a developer with the JWT token in the verification process. So that is something that we would like to improve upon. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And I've just got a couple of questions here on our YouTube. Is SSO single sign-on? Absolutely. SSO is single sign-on. So this is effectively, when you go to a website and you see sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook, sign in with Apple, this is all the same technology. As Gerard just said, currently that has to go through something like Auth0 or Cognito because you can customize that middleware, as it were. But this is something we're going to be improving so that you can do SSO directly against SurrealDB in a similar way. So you can authenticate with Google, with GitHub or Google or Facebook or something directly against SurrealDB in a future release. So we're going to be working on that. I've got an interesting question here from EasyC. how to have Surreal authenticate scopes across databases and potentially namespaces. Does JWKs help? So I'll let Gerard answer that properly, but I think that's now possible because the authentication and the knowledge of that token is separate from the database entirely. It's on a separate platform. So as long as you use that same JWKs token, is that now possible? Or is that still limited?
No. That's true. That's true. But when I was reading the question, I was understanding as the sign-in method that is within the scopes in SurrealDB. If you are relying on JWKs to integrate with a third-party authenticator, that is correct because you could define exactly the same token pointing to the same, the same credentials, the same signing cryptographic material. And yeah, the same token would be trusted across scopes that could live in different databases or even in different SurrealDB clusters or instances. It does not matter. In that sense, yes, it enables it.
What you don't get is the scope level, row level permissions that you can get with the scopes, because that scope is specific to the data in the database that it's on. Yeah. Interesting question. So yes and no is the answer to that, if that makes sense. But we've got some improvements that we're planning as well. We'll talk about those in a future release or a future stream around the authentication and being able to kind of limit what namespace users and database users can and can't do. So that would enable you to actually integrate with a JWKs on multiple namespaces or multiple databases, but then still have those row level access permissions defined for those tokens for those users. So no at the moment, but it's definitely something we want to try and improve on in the future. But JWKs definitely enables you to improve the authentication around the namespace and the database users for multiple different namespaces and databases. Yeah. That's a great question. Just looking through the questions here. So I'll bring this up anyway. It's not really to do with the release today or security, but encourage you to use an open source initiative compliant license to engage much wider community. You can do dual license proprietary and AGPL to protect your commercial interests. It's always something we're thinking about and looking at how to improve. Kefa. We don't have any immediate decisions to change that right now, but we're always interested in working out how to increase the reach of SurrealDB and get it used by as many people as possible. Obviously, there are OSI compliant licenses and there are non-OSI compliant licenses, but I think grouping every non-OSI compliant license together, let's say the business source license, which we're using, there are 1,000 different implementations of the business source license as well. Some are more restrictive, some are less restrictive. Effectively, we've only got a limitation on running a database as a service. So, from actually what can you do with it perspective as an enterprise or as a business or as a developer, you can do everything you can do with the Apache 2 license except for running a database as a service managed cloud runtime. So it's very flexible, and as I say, comparing business source licenses with each other without actually looking at the definitions of those is something which is important to watch out for. But yeah, I mean, always open to listening to our community and seeing how we can improve, but no immediate kind of decisions right at the moment to change the license. So I've got one question from EZC here. How do JWKs fit in with OAuth and OpenID? I think this is a big question, right? Because you've got, and this is something that goes beyond my knowledge as well. You've got SAML, you've got OpenID, you've got OAuth, OAuth 2. There's so many different specifications out there. So how do JWKs fit in with OAuth and OpenID?
So OAuth and OpenID Connect are interconnected in the sense that OpenID Connect is the merge. It uses OpenID and OAuth to let's say authenticate you with an identity that then you can use in different services. OAuth, it makes claims regarding the access that you have. So OpenID Connect basically it uses OAuth to give you access to the identity of a user in a different service. Very simplified, but this is basically what it is. So both services are very related in the sense that OAuth is part of OpenID Connect. where does JWKs fit? It's very well. So it fits on top of that in the sense that both OAuth and OpenID Connect provide a workflow at the end of which you get a token, a JWT. And what JWK provides is a way of verifying this token. So that's where it all fits together. So JWK is not part of the specification. It's after you have completed the workflow, how you verify the token that you got, or how, in this case, SurrealDB verifies that token.
And when you say OAuth, you're talking about OAuth 2, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's confusing. I think also you were mentioning something to me the other day, Gerard, that SAML is almost being replaced bit by OAuth.
In the sense of use, yeah, it's simpler and well, for example, SAML, the workflow in the end, you don't have a JWT. So it wouldn't fit with SAML. So, but however, for example, if you integrate with those authentication providers that we mentioned, all of them allow you to authenticate with a SAML identity provider, but doing OAuth workflow with the let's say with Auth0 or with AWS Cognito. So at the end, you would get a JWT even if the identity provider is a SAML provider like Okta, for example. But all of the SAML providers nowadays, and I would like to hear if you have a use case where you would need to use SAML, because it's something that I'm always thinking on. I don't know about any managed authentication service that requires, so that only supports SAML and not OpenID Connect.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah. I was going to say we've got another question here, which is an interesting one. Not something I understand. So why not use K256, which is a public-private key, which allows message signing? But is that not in the communication rather than the encryption of the token?
I don't know. No, well, I mean, so elliptic curve is for exchanging keys. How it's used in message signing, I don't know. But the answer to how we chose the algorithms that are used in SurrealDB, it's basically all of them that are trusted by the JWT token library that we use. So it was not a very conscious decision, to be honest, and we have not looked into it. But if we know about use cases that you have involving other cryptographic algorithms, of course we could look into it. Can you share if you have a use case for it, or it's just a security improvement? Because I'm not familiar with it. So if you can share it, I would be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, Void Walker. I mean, definitely. If you want to either share on here, but even better, if you can jump on our GitHub and add a feature request for that, we can see if that can fit in. Yeah. But as Gerard said, it's the implementation so far, and there are lots of different key types which we support, right? From HMAC to elliptic curve and things like that. So there are quite a lot of algorithms supported already. But yeah, definitely, if you've got a use case for that, then jump onto the GitHub and add an issue for that. That'd be brilliant. I've got an interesting one here, which is, SurrealDB is usually a third-party service, and your website is operating on one domain, and SurrealDB is operating on a different domain, and therefore authentication via cookies has never been something that we've really focused on, albeit with Firebase, you can now have some kind of proxy that enables you to authenticate with a cookie, and therefore you've got the security of HTTP only and things like that. I've got a question here from Dylan. Dylan, great question. Will auth cookies be supported? The JWT is stored via a cookie instead of sent through a header, and therefore I presume you're asking that for the purposes of HTTP only and inability to access that from JavaScript, from the local storage. So that's a good question. I don't think Gerard and I could answer that today. It's definitely something which...
I mean, I can talk a bit about it, because there is a GitHub issue open that I have discussed a bit on, and I agree on the value. I would like to hear about the use cases. I can see some, but I would like to understand them better in order to implement that. So I think what Dylan is asking is, instead of providing the token via the authorization beer and then the value, the base64 value of the JWT, providing it via a cookie. So when you do request to SurrealDB, to the HTTP API, for example, you don't need to add any additional headers, but if you have a cookie that contains the value of the token, then you trust that cookie and you provide them access to the SurrealDB resources. This would not be that hard to implement, actually. I mean, it's pretty simple. It would just be a matter of getting to it, but most of all, understanding the use case, just to not implement something just for the sake of it or just because it's technically possible. But if there is value on that, and if there are users that would benefit from it, I think that's something that could be done. But of
Yeah,
course,
the way I understand it is because Firebase had the same thing, right? You always had to send a token which was stored in local storage, and we're talking about client side here, right? Because it's different on the server side. But so you send a token as a string or something. You access that in JavaScript. Obviously, that has its authentication issues, and cookies are better from that perspective. But they then had to have this bit that was running on the server that. So it was on the same domain, because obviously with the kind of ban almost on the third-party cookies, you now can't connect to a cookie directly to SurrealDB. So that's the bit that's tricky. Authenticating via the cookie isn't the difficult aspect, as Gerard just said. It's more working out how you connect from the client to SurrealDB as a first-class domain rather than a third-class domain. So yeah, something we could definitely look into in the future, but it's a little bit more complex, as it almost requires having a SurrealDB proxy on your servers, so running in Node or on Express or Golang or something like that to push that token to SurrealDB. So we've got some. So EasyC's got some interesting questions here. I'll go with the easier one first. So, when might refresh tokens come to Surreal? I can't seem to find any docs related to it. Yeah, it's a great question, and something we were chatting about just before this call. I'll let Gerard take this away.
Yeah, you don't find docs because the feature is not there yet. It's one of the things that we would like to do. There are some things around how we manage tokens that we would like to improve, and that would be one of them. So for now, what you would do is sign in again, or that's one of the benefits with integrating with a third-party authentication provider. So that's one of the gaps that SurrealDB currently have, and that you could bridge with, for example, like Cognito. When you request a token via the OAuth endpoints, there is a refresh endpoint, which basically just issues you a different token. So you get an identity token, and then you can you can request as many access tokens as you want for a time frame with your refresh token. Not identity token. With your refresh token, you can ask for as many identity tokens as you want within a time frame. So that you could get by integrating SurrealDB with an authentication provider. But that is something that we would like to eventually be within SurrealDB natively.
Definitely. And then following on from that, what's the long-term plan for Surreal as a primary authentication platform? I think you kind of touched on that in that answer just then, but
yeah,
it's definitely something we want to improve on, right? We want SurrealDB to be flexible. If you want to have a Okta or Auth0 or use Google single sign-on, then that's fine. If you want to bring your functionality right into SurrealDB and not have to rely on those, that's something we want to make doable and as optimized as possible as well. So yeah, I think, Gerard, have you got anything else to add to that?
No, yeah, I mean, basically being an authentication platform is a big, not only responsibility, but of course it's a big amount of work. But we already do some of it in SurrealDB in the sense that you can authenticate with it and we issue you a token, but this is very confined what you can do with it. Or for example, this token that is issued, you don't choose the secret, you don't choose the cryptographic algorithm that is used to sign it or the claims that it contains. So we would like to add more flexibility on that, and that would be building into eventually becoming kind of an authentication provider that you could use for other services. So you could use SurrealDB authentication, and then the token that you get, it would be powerful enough that you could use it in other services to authenticate and authorize SurrealDB users within other services. This is what realistically we could achieve in the midterm, no? And I think that would be already very useful. But of course, we would like to provide as much as we want with regards to authentication in SurrealDB. So let's see where we can get.
Awesome. So before we go, I just want to jump in and talk about a few of the smaller features in this release, but they're small features in terms of the examples here, but really you can simplify your what you're doing in SurrealDB and the workload that you're working with. So the first one is a read-only field. This was possible before, but it was kind of long-winded in terms of how you went about it. So you had to say, if there's a previous value, then use that value. Otherwise, use this new value. Whereas now you can specify read-only. So if this record is created and the value doesn't exist, it uses that value, but otherwise it doesn't ever change that value going forward. So effectively, it's read-only once it's been written to for the first time. And the second feature is really an improvement on how you define fields. So beforehand, when you defined array number on a field, it wouldn't actually work very well. You had to define foo and then foo dot asterisk. Now you can define foo as an array of number, and that then implicitly behind the scenes adds foo dot asterisk as a subtype. So much easier now to add your custom types, your embedded objects, your embedded arrays, anything like that. And it fits more in line with the way that you defined types before, or cast to types before, which is great. Some of the smaller features that we've added into this, we've got a new set of string comparison functions for semver, so for version comparison. So this is available on the string semver path, and that enables you to compare versions, to increment a version, a major version, a minor version, a patch version, and everything like that. So if you're working with versions directly in SurrealDB, that makes it really easy to work with. In addition to that, we've added, which is quite a small feature in terms of what it appears to do, but quite a useful feature. So remove table if exists. What this enables is the ability to check if a table exists before you remove it, because otherwise it would have caused an error before. In version 1.3, we're also adding in functionality on define table and all the define field types as well, so that you can check if something exists or if it doesn't exist, so that you can ensure that you don't overwrite your field definitions or your table definitions or any defined function, really. So that's really just slight improvements to kind of enabling you to work with your schemas in a better way. But there are lots of other little things and bug fixes, so definitely jump into the surrealdb.com/releases page to see what's in this release. This week as well, we'll be releasing 1.3.0 beta, which will have some of the functionality I've just talked about, and we'll be adding in more performance improvements over the next month before our next release in March. So yeah, well, let me just check if there are any more questions before we head off. Right, so we've got a question here on YouTube from LinkedIn. Apologies, the sync doesn't work sometimes, Craig, so thank you for jumping on YouTube as well. Is there a roadmap for other enterprise features, specifically around authentication and enterprise? What's next? There's definitely an internal roadmap. We've talked a little bit about some of the things we intend to do on the authentication side as well. But yeah, we've got some big plans for kind of the functionality around enterprise, and you'll see on our careers page, we're looking for an enterprise platform senior developer who will be focusing on authentication, authorization, and some of the more enterprise focused features. So absolutely, we can't share exact roadmap details just yet, but just rest assured that we've got some big plans for the enterprise side, the authentication side, and we'll share as much as we can in the next few months as we have a better understanding of when those features will be coming into the product. So yeah, good question, and thanks for jumping on YouTube for that. It's an interesting question here. Can a root user change a read-only value? So a read-only value is not really about permissions, it's about schema. And in this context, it doesn't matter if you're root or if you're a scoped user. Once a value is read-only, it cannot be changed by anybody. So that's definitely the intention. If you want to prevent a user from updating or deleting or modifying a field, then you can use the permissions on that field. But yeah, read-only, the read-only keyword is definitely for schema rather than permissioned uses. And then one final question before we head off: can arrays be nested? I.e., an array of number. Absolutely, you can do an array of array number, and actually it will create those subsidiary field definitions as well for you. So you can go as deep as you want, really, for those definitions, as much as you can understand anyway. But yeah, array of a number is definitely something that's possible in the new field definition. Awesome. So, Gerard, thank you. It's been a deep dive into, or a shallow deep dive into authorization and authentication in SurrealDB. And if you've got any other questions on this stream or feature requests that you think might be useful for you in your organizations or in your applications, then jump onto our GitHub and submit a feature request. Other than that, we'll be plowing ahead and releasing new features, and we can't wait to show you what's in 1.3. But for everyone who joined us today, thank you. For everyone who's watching after today, hope you enjoy the stream, and see you at the next one. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.